I am going to tell you a chess fact that you're probably not going to like. Openings, while boring, actually work. And trust me, I am the #1 opening hater, but if you want to get better, you have to learn openings. Here are two games played with the same initial opening. Game A, we have someone who doesn't know the moves and is just playing normally. And for Game B, we have a person who has learned all the main lines. But here is something important. Both opponents with the black pieces know the opening. So, let's go over each game and see the difference. Game A starts with pawn g3. Black responds with d5. The most obvious move after this is to put the bishop on g2, and black just protects the pawn. This is the Hungarian opening, Slav formation, but player A wouldn't really know that. Here he does a questionable move. He goes knight c3. Black then does the obvious. They push the pawn forward. So now the knight has to move back. To me, this seems like an immediate punishment and a waste of moves. Then black just pushes another pawn on e5. Let's go over at game B and see the first 4 moves there. Obviously, g3, d5. But then black played knight f6, which is a standard line. Player B doesn't bother and just goes knight f3. Black just moves the c-pawn to form a pawn chain. For move 4, white castles and black puts pressure on the f3 knight. Let's compare the two. Game A seems horrible for white. These 2 pawns in the center appear really strong. Only the bishop is really doing anything. Overall, a hard game to play in. Game B seems familiar. The king is safe, the knight controls the d4 and e5 square, and you can find moves that are easy to play. Let's go over to game A again. He had the right idea with this next move, pawn c3. This is a strong center, so let's exchange, he thought. However, if you have ever watched my videos, you would know that maintaining pressure is very important, and black does exactly that. Instead of relieving that pressure, they instead build up the other knight with d7. So white, seeing himself in a desperate situation, looks for the immediate exchange. Pawn e3, hoping black moves the knight and pawns go on a huge battle, where the queen then is forced to go to the center. This is great for white, but it didn't go this way. Pawn e3? Buddy, you just allowed yourself for a brutal lock with pawn to d3. Mind you, this has gone downhill by move 6. Game B, however, is completely different. This position allows for many different moves. But player B follows the opening with pawn d3, opening the path for the bishop, but also that d3 pawn now covers the important squares of e4 and c4. Black then develops the knight with d7, and white develops their own knight. It isn't until the end of move 6 that we get a significant push with pawn e5. But remember, we are still in the opening phase. Player B knows that now all he has to do is push the e4 pawn and then exchanges will happen. Only when the black queen goes to e7 are we at the end of the opening. Nothing really impressive happened, but nothing bad happened either. However, I can't say the same thing about game A. We left it off at the insane d3 pawn lock. And what does white try to do now? The worst move. He gets the queen out to d4. The idea behind it is that the queen seems to be the only piece that can really move, but as I have told you guys, never get the queen out too early, especially if it's alone. Because immediately after that move, black goes c5, attacking the queen. Obviously, it has to retreat, and it goes to h4 hoping for an exchange. Black doesn't do that. Instead, it attacks the queen again, forcing it to go out to c4. Then bishop e6, oh boy. a4, b3, and e4, covered by the knight. d4 and f4, covered by the pawn. g4 and h4, covered by the bishops. b5 and a6, covered by the pawn chain. Literally, the only safe place is behind the knight, self-pinning itself, which you don't see often. Player A is fighting for his life, and player B is just thinking about the mid-game. After e7, white goes queen e1, freeing the knight because now it is no longer pinned to the queen. The black king castles, and then player B does the obvious move, pawn to h3, pushing out the bishop. But this bishop is really active and that is not good. So white goes knight g5, hoping to take it out. Opponent agrees and they exchange pieces. Mind you, this is move 12. The mid-game now is complex but balanced. While on game A, we are still at move 10. The only way out of this is to push the c-pawn. But of course, black is not going to let you. They go pawn a5, targeting the queen. White goes queen a3. The a-pawn is pushed and the queen is back to the self pin on b4. This is terrible because not only is the queen trapped, but the opponent can develop pieces without a care in the world like knight f6. We go c4 hoping to get the queen to c3, but at this point the opponent is just dominating. First they place the rook to a5, and player A puts the queen to c3, thinking it is safe. But black has knight e4 and there is nowhere for the queen to go to. Player A just ended up exchanging and then taking the rook with the queen. Down 4 points, player A just forfeited. Obviously, this game is not over, and massive blunders can happen. But small mistakes matter a lot, especially in the opening, because they are very punishing. If we let the computer play the game out, we end up in this position at move 42. Obviously, everyone can see that the game is pretty much over. The king is too exposed, and there are so many passed pawns ready to promote, not to even mention the plus 12 in material. So yeah, that opening was a disaster. Funny part is, if you let the computer play this out even more, it just finishes the game in 8 moves by sacrificing its pieces. Let's look at game B and see how much easier it is to play the game and how the game turned out. After knight e6, there are many ways you can go about this. Either knight f3 or pawn b3 to then place the bishop on b2. Player B went with the bishop plan, and after a few moves, we arrive at this position in move 20. A more simplified game state, where the knight is threatening the rook. Here comes the first real blunder. Opponent takes the pawn with the rook. Sure, it looks like a +1 initially, but now the king is completely exposed to horizontal attacks. That is why player B goes to c1. Rooks get exchanged, and the queen is now threatening the king. The best move here is to move, but still white has knight to d6, and one of my preferable places for knight to be in, protected by the pawn. If you thought about taking the pawn with the queen, trust me, it goes bad. White has knight to f7, triple forking the king, queen, and rook. The only real move is to take the queen to d7 and hopefully attack the knight with the bishop. White doesn't let that happen by going queen f4. The opponent even tries baiting player B with f5, hoping for an en passant and losing the knight. White breaks the non-spoken rule of chess that the en passant is forced and instead goes c1. There is not much black can do, and rook c8 checks the king. The best play here is to exchange the queen, but instead the opponent goes to e7, sealing his fate. The white queen to g5 checks the king again, and the only square available is e6. Now it's time for white to end the game, queen to f6 checkmate. This was a side-by-side comparison of what happens when a player knows the opening and when they do not. Not every game will be like this, obviously, but your chances of losing increase so much when the opponent actually knows the lines of an opening and you don't. And that's a hard chess fact. That's it. Go watch this video now and become a better chess player. Maybe even subscribe for more lessons.